Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, continuing on with our setup for doing Foundry Module Development. So we've got our project and we've got all of our configuration for Git set up the way we want it for the time being to enforce standardized commit messages. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start adding some actual content to this project. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a document directory. Oops, make directory docs. Okay, and having created that, we're now going to use a bit of Docker magic. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a system called Sphinx to do our documentation. The reasons will become apparent as we go on, but basically Sphinx will allow us to document not only our code but everything about the project. So we'll be able to keep things like tutorials, instructions on how to use the module, tutorials on the documents, tutorials on how to set up the development environment, basically everything you need to know about using this module. And we can put all of that into the docs directory, which will be part of this repository, but won't be part of the delivered module, because we're going to have a build phase that will actually construct the delivered module. We'll get to that shortly. Okay, so you use this rather daunting looking command, which will run the Docker as the current user, and it will populate the docs directory we just created with an outline default Sphinx. We're going to change it, as with most of these things, but this will do to get us started. Okay, so we run that. So the first thing that happens is it goes and fetches the Docker image for this Sphinx documentation system. This will only happen the first time you access it, but it needs to be done so that it's got the whole Sphinx documentation system ready to be used. Then it automatically runs the quick start for us, which prompts us to start making some decisions. Now, to keep everything neat and tidy, we'll keep the build directory inside where the sources are. And the name will be, this is the name of the documentation as you want it to appear in the build documentation. So we will call it Foundry VTT Theatre of the Mind Module. Okay, well, we can change it later if we want to, but that's going to be our starting point. And the author, the project release, which for the time being will keep as the same. This is going to be updated by our bump process that we've set up with this committizen. We'll talk about that later because we need to do quite a bit of work to make sure that all of the releases stay in line. Yeah, the tags as they're created by our build process, the release as it's shown on our documentation, and the release as it's shown in the module itself. So to keep all of those in line, that's part of the magic of why we set up the committizen stuff. The language will be English, and that's it. We're all set up. So now, if we look at the docs directory, it's populated with a framework, and the only document that actually produces content at the moment is this index.rst. The rest of it is part of the build process. Okay, so that's that. Now, this just lets us to gives us something to edit. So if we look at the index file, okay, what you see is that this is in the restructured text format, which is a bit more complicated than Markdown, but it's a similar kind of idea. It is a Markdown language, or it's a markup language rather, that allows us to do some quite sophisticated things, not least of which is generate things like API documentation for our module, along with extracting comments from our code to put into the documentation and all sorts of magic that we will get to later. Okay, so that's that. So this quick start only needs to be done once. It gives us our initial document. Okay, so if we look now, the only thing we've added is this documents directory. All the Docker stuff is now safely hidden away. It's actually in this image called Sphinx Doc Sphinx. Okay, so it's all off to one side. It's kept out of the way, and the reason for that is that our documentation in this context is fairly ancillary to what we're doing. It's an extra. Okay, and when we come to writing our build process, this is something that can be run independent of the rest of it. Okay, so we've now got our documentation in its quote-unquote source format, if you like. Now what we need to do is we need to actually build that into some HTML. And in a surprise to no one, we will do that using a Docker command. Okay, so again, it's basically the same command, except you'll notice at the end, instead of saying Sphinx quick start, it says make HTML. And that will run our build process. And it's nice and quick. So if we now look at our docs directory, you'll notice that the build directory now has a whole load of stuff in it. And in actual fact, the thing that we can hit now is this HTML directory, which contains all of our documentation. So how do we take a look at it? Well, if you're running this as a window on a graphical user interface, you should be able to point your browser at that directory, pick up the index.html, and everything is hunky-dory. However, I'm not running mine like that. I'm running mine as a text-only server. So what we do is we use Docker again, except this time we're going to run an NGX server. And the Nginx server is going to pick up the docs build HTML directory, and it will serve that up as a website basically. I'm going to put it onto port 8080 just to keep it out of the way. So now this is 8080 on whichever machine I'm running this on. Now I'm running it on a server separate from the machine that I use for my browser. If you're using it on the same machine, then you could just use localhost. But I'm actually using another server, and the name of my server is Foundry Mod Dev 1. And so when I access this Foundry Mod Dev 1 at port 8080, I see this lovely documentation, and I can look at things like the page source and, well, not that there's much point. There's not a huge amount in here at the moment, obviously, because it's just one page. So that is the Docker setup. Now what we need to do is we need to stop this from serving it. So we can say Docker stop. And it's actually, you see the name we gave it, the doc server. So we can stop the doc server, and now we're no longer running it. So we can see that we're not running any. Remembering and typing in those docs is obviously going to give you a bad time. So what we will do is we will add it to our package JSON, and under these scripts, okay, we're going to add another one. Well, another two actually. Now we don't need to add the quick start because that's something that we will run only once. Okay, but what we will do is we will add instructions for building and serving documentation. Okay, so we will add a build docs directive, and that is just going to be our make HTML. We just take this command that we ran before and put it into there. Okay, and we will also add a shortcut for build. Let's just call it build serve because it keeps it in the sort of imperative command. Now, fortunately, npm takes care of the fact of setting the context correctly for these. So, okay. So now, if we do npm run build docs, we get a problem because I've made a mistake. Oh, my bad. It's because of all these quotes. Okay, so all of these need to be preceded by a backslash. Okay, so run build docs. And okay, so that's the build. Okay, that's obviously not what we want. It makes more sense to say serve docs. Okay, and now okay, so now it's telling me that it's running the serve docs, and I can go back, and if I just refresh this page or hit it again, you can see it is actually serving them, and we can once again move around our documentation. Cool. Okay. The only other thing that we have to remember is how to stop it. Now, what we could do is we could say something, we could create another command, or you just remember okay. So that's that. So now if we go to git status, okay, you can see that we've got all of this good stuff here. Now there is a problem, and that is if we add this stuff now, well, let's just do it. If I add the docs directory, okay, which I want to do, I want to add the sources. The problem is that if I now go and look at this, you'll see I've got all of the build directory in there, which obviously I don't want. Okay, so okay, so this is another case where we want to edit the git ignore file. Okay, and in here we want to add in a section. We don't need to do this, but it's polite for documentation. Okay, so let's just call it docs, and what we want to ignore is the docs underscore build directory. Now we don't need that because it's a directory as well. So we don't need to put any of that build directory in because we can regenerate it. So let's now do that. So now if I add the docs directory, okay, and I then look at the status, okay, it's only added in effectively the source files. Now you will notice though that it has not added in the static or the templates directory, and that's because Git will ignore empty directories. So the way we get around that is we just do a touch to create a file, and we add the directories that we do want it to do, and we'll call it something like git keep. Okay, so we just touch a file that won't show up in the normal course of events, but it will allow us to okay, so it'll just make sure that those directories are created even though they are quote-unquote empty at the moment. Right, so we also need to add in the git ignore. because we want to keep that, and we want to add in the package that we changed. Okay, so that's our change. So now we can commit that, and well, I'm going to put this under documentation because it is, although we are also adding in things like the documentation system, it's only for the documents that we're making these changes. Okay, so add the initial documentation system. And I don't think there's any point in adding anything else. No, it's not a breaking change, and it's not an open issue. Okay. And that's it. We're good. We're job done. Okay. So, having added that all in, we're now in a position to do the next step, which is to actually add some module code. So before I do that, I'm going to check out everything and make sure that it all works. So to do that, I'm going to push this up. So if I go back over to my browser and I go in and I look at my Theatre of the Mind repository, do a quick refresh. Okay, and there's all the stuff that we've just added in. Cool. We are so rock and roll. Okay. So, what did I mean by testing it? Well, I should be able to remove this in its entirety. Okay, and then I should be able to just clone it back out. Okay, and there it is. And I should now be able to do an npm install to get everything set up. Okay, so that's everything set up now. It's added our hooks back in with Husky, and it's installed any packages we needed, which in this case was nothing very interesting. It was much quicker because, of course, it's using the globally cached set of files. But if I just look at the docs, okay, obviously all the build stuff will have gone, and there's no build directory. But if I now do npm build docs, oh, I didn't type run because I'm an idiot. Okay, and so now there's my docs, and again I can do npm serve docs. Oh, I did it again. Honestly, where's my brain today? Okay, and I can come over to my browser again and reload this page, and sure enough, there it all is. Cool. Okay, back to my terminal, and just remember to tidy up. Docker, just need to kill that off. Ready for the next step. Okay, so we're now ready to add some documentation, and then once I've done that, we can get on and put in a module.